We finally have a gigantic info drop from SpaceX on Flight 12 coming, we hope, in just a few days. They have had a few minor challenges this week, which is why the launch date has been pushed a little from the earliest opportunity, but we have now learned some really cool surprises revealed in this mission. With that, they've released a bunch of information on the version 3 Starship that was certainly new to us. That's all just the start, because we've got loads more to talk about too. As you can see, we have a lot to catch you up on.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Hey, Marcus House with you here, and SpaceX has given us a heap to unpack for you for this video. I had left you last week with these gorgeous shots that Shaun picked up of the Super Heavy on the Pad 2 launch mount, and there was the upper stage Starship crawling up here in front. Just as we had published that video, SpaceX were lifting Ship 39 off the brand new transport stand for the very first time. We also had never seen the new Pad 2 tower arms hoisting a ship before, so it was a nice scene there as SpaceX used those lifting points to support the huge beast as it was guided down gently onto the top of the version 3 Super Heavy. This was more unique than you may think, because the previous versions of ships used a ball and socket type setup which had to be deployed between lifts. Although it is true that SpaceX had installed lift and catch points on a few of the previous Starships, they didn't actually use those points for lifting with the tower. In fact, these were more for testing purposes as they evolved this system to what we see now. So yes, this is the first time that a ship was lifted using the actual lift and catch points, so that ball and socket type setup has now been entirely removed. Of course, SpaceX promptly posted glorious shots during the stacking process and also of the full stack once complete. What we have been most curious to explore was an image just like this one. This was in fact the first opportunity that we've had to peer into the skirt of a version 3 Starship. This clearly shows how much cleaner it is in the ship's business end. We can now see that the vacuum engines no longer have bracing on the upper nozzle to support it during flight. The engine itself must have adequate support designed right in, so less parts needed there, I guess. With that, the false ceiling up here still exists, but has been dramatically reduced when we compare it to the previous versions of Starship. This was a nice opportunity, in fact, to get some assistance thanks to the awesome ChameleonCircuit. If you look here, you can see the engines are no longer surrounded entirely by shielding. That used to require some pretty extreme carbon dioxide purge control to clear out potentially explosive gas buildup around the engines during their operation. If you recall, we saw issues previously needing this consideration, such as in Starship Flight Test 8, where the aft section decided to liberate equipment in the aft end, leading to this crazy ride. Anyway, with this much neater new setup of the aft of Starship, that purging system shouldn't be needed. While we are here, by the way, this is a camera, so we should continue to get plenty of views of the Raptor engines as they push the ship to its intended trajectory. Now, the 3 vents in the skirt which we saw dumping propellant on previous flights during the coast phase are now gone. Instead, you may have noticed these strange shaped pipes visible along the inside of the aft flaps here on version 3. We can now see that each side leads to a manifold at the base of the aft flaps, which now has multiple nozzles for reaction control. Now there is loads to explore on the outside of the vehicle too, of course. You may have noticed during the ship's prior appearances that the housings for the 4 docking drogues were already in place, but that the docking drogues themselves were not yet present. Well, they have now been installed as expected, and both pairs seem to be the passive counterparts to their probe and drogue non-androgynous system. The aft cameras that point towards the flaps have been installed, so we hope to be getting some shots from their perspectives during the flight, particularly that awesome re-entry. It's always fun to see if there are any issues with the vehicle in detail, especially with heat shield tiles and such. Speaking of, we have really nice views now of the test tile patches all over Ship 39. As always, it's pretty hard to tell the difference between all of the tests, but some will be testing a number of different tile recipes and different adhesive or attachment methods. All of these ones that we are looking at are on the leeward side of the ship away from the direct plasma, but a lot of the research is likely being done here to ensure the method of attachment survives all of those launch and entry vibrations. Now you may have noticed the these evenly positioned white tiles along both sides of the ship too, but we'll dig more into those shortly as SpaceX told us exactly what those are for. Getting back to the full stack testing process, SpaceX moved right into getting the newly upgraded ship quick disconnect interface positioned and hooked up to the ship for the first time, giving those flaps a little wiggle there before moving both the ship and booster transport stands away. The tower arms unhooked, and there it is, the first full version 3 stack, and wow, does that look polished compared to previous vehicles. It was now time for the full wet dress rehearsal. The roadblock was pushed back and the range safety officer was even out in the water making sure the beach areas were clear. Sadly, just before the propellant load was supposed to begin, it seemed like some sort of abort took place with venting starting there. The issue seems to have stemmed from the tri-vent on the back of the tower, and SpaceX quickly had it removed and soon after had lifted a new pipe in its place. This time it just had a single exit. It was installed one level lower on the tower and off to one of the corners here against the tower leg, so they needed a vertical pipe to connect it to the old outlet. SpaceX hasn't confirmed why they needed to do this, but we're speculating that they wanted to dump that excess further away from the tower so that it isn't as likely to blow back into the structure and freeze up any sensors or important components. So with those modifications complete, they were back to try again. The arms released the full stack once more, and while doing so, they had begun running cryogenic fluids through the brand new pipe. Everything seemed good there, and we were soon seeing the frost climbing both the booster and the Starship. The speed of this process now blows my mind. The entire Starship was filled with around 5,000 metric tons of liquid methane and oxygen in just 36 minutes. That's enough to fill 10 Falcon 9s in about the same amount of time. Now, coming off the ship quick disconnect arm here was what we believe is the engine chill dump vent, which has been routed down the quick disconnect and off the bottom. You may recall this propellant was previously dumped below the flaps here. Anyway, this engine chill makes it clear SpaceX were approaching the simulated T0 mark. The detonation suppression system fired up, followed by the deluge, and with that, everything looked great. SpaceX confirmed that the launch rehearsal was complete with another collage of frosty, beautiful images. With that testing now complete, both Ship 39 and Booster 19 needed to come back down and make their way to their respective megabays to be finalised for flight. The arms were reattached to the upper stage and the ship was lifted off and soon being set down gently on the transport stand. Shaun was up bright and early to grab us footage of the action as the ship began rolling across to Highway 4 and then right on out to the build site where it was rolled back into Megabay 2. In what has to be one of the busiest days of operations ever, Booster 19 was also moving just hours after the ship. The tower arms raised again and swung in to hook up. All 20 of the hold-down clamps were retracted, and finally we could see the new paint job in the daylight. It certainly now matches the SpaceX 3D render from last year very well. Shaun was also watching this pass by and even peering through the transport stand to sneak in some views of those Raptor 3s inside. As always, thanks so much for being subscribed here and watching along so that we get to do this. We could not do it without you, in fact. Before long, Booster 19 was rolling there into Megabay 1. The teams took this time with the pad clear to resume that testing of the top deck deluge system now that all repairs and modifications are complete. That gave us a bunch more crazy action of this system in play. 4 tests so far, in fact. Here it was firing off on Thursday, the next came later that day, and then another 2 just yesterday on Friday. That is a very gutsy sort of place to be standing there, Ezekiel. After that was done, this one was from just hours ago as I was getting this video ready to export. All of these were very healthy looking tests, which looks to have given them the green light to push forward with launch. It seems that SpaceX still needed to do some testing with Ship 39, which was heading out again to Massey's on Friday in the early morning for some additional checks. There is already new beach closures for what seems to be further wet dress testing on Sunday with a backup date on Monday. I suspect they're just quickly testing out some tweaked procedures using data from the first wet dress rehearsal, but it doesn't seem to be causing any delay to the launch date at this point. So when are we likely to see this flight? Well, SpaceX has been busy getting all the various paperwork and approvals updated with the new timeframes. We have updated notices to both marine and air missions from the US. It'll fly down past Jamaica, and then the Starship will again head right around and re-enter well out from the west coast of Australia in the Indian Ocean for a controlled splashdown demonstration. The closures show May 19th on Tuesday now, with backups running through to the 29th, and we also just yesterday saw the official launch license appear from the FAA. This date was finally backed by SpaceX directly in one of the two brand new articles on their website, which I must say were absolutely intriguing. These go into depth about some of their plans with this Starship Flight 12, but also the changes to version 3. I'll come right back to that in a moment, but first a huge thank you to Surfshark VPN sponsoring this video. We are always so happy to work with sponsors that provide a service that we use every day. For us, a virtual private network is essential, and that is because there are so many services that just geo-block your access to stuff. Just one example is that a YouTube channel can simply block access to see a video depending on where you're from. With that, many news, social media, sports and entertainment sites restrict access too. It is infuriating, especially if you are traveling and can't even access your stuff from home. Well, Surfshark VPN is your key to unlock content that has been geo-blocked from you, and it lets you do this by allowing you to appear to be browsing from pretty much anywhere in the world. On top of that, it forces everything in the connection to be encrypted, which can add an extra layer of protection that you don't always have by default. I've got it here installed on my phone too. Once you install it, you just select the country that you want to be browsing from. I've got New Zealand here as an example, but it could be anywhere. You just hit connect and there we go, it connects up this quickly. If New Zealand has access to something that I need that Australia doesn't, that restriction is now removed. The great thing is, with the one subscription, I have this on multiple phones and PCs. With the one plan, they let you use it on unlimited devices in fact, and you can try it all out with a 30-day money-back guarantee. To get 4 extra months for free, just use my link surfshark.com/Marcus or use the code Marcus at checkout. Alternatively, you can scan the QR code right there on screen to get started. Thank you, Surfshark. Okay, so getting back to SpaceX's info dump during the week, let's start here with the exciting official Flight 12 mission plan. Although the overall objectives are largely what you would expect, there are some neat surprises too. Of course, to start off with, they want to successfully launch and get through max Q. Given the Raptor 3s now have quite a bit more total thrust, based on the timeline here, max Q looks to be roughly 17 seconds sooner than previous flights, so it is going to be very interesting to compare the timing of all of the launch sequence to other missions once Flight 12 has taken place. The hot staging will be a brand new spectacle, of course, given that it is fully integrated now. All 6 Raptor 3 engines will fire up in a staggered way at stage separation, and that will help flip the Super Heavy for its boost back burn. It should use all 13 engines to reverse that trajectory again and begin its journey for a controlled test splashdown a few miles offshore. It needs to demonstrate that it can survive re-entry with that pinpoint precision. Remember, there are now only 3 grid fins instead of 4, and they are shaped differently to the previous boosters too. If they can really nail that controlled splashdown, we hope that SpaceX will be fine to try a tower catch for Flight 13. Now here's where it gets a little more unique for this mission. SpaceX are loading more dummy satellites into the ship than they ever have, 22 in fact, and this will be an approximate payload totaling a huge 44 tons. Obviously, this will be the Starship's largest payload to date by a long shot. After all, they only launched 8 dummy satellites on Flight 11. With that, I am thrilled to see that the last 2 satellites will be equipped with hardware that will be used to scan the ship's heat shield and send imagery back down to the ground. We have been requesting this since the start of these deployment tests, so I hope we get to see those views live. Now in the future, SpaceX will be able to use this data to determine whether it is safe to initiate a deorbit burn and return to the launch site for a catch. This is quite similar really to what NASA used to do with the Space Shuttle when leaving the International Space Station for its re-entry. Now this is where those white tiles that I mentioned earlier come into the picture. These are actually just regular tiles which have been painted white. Imagine, I guess, that these are unintentional missing tiles. SpaceX should be able to use those 2 dummy satellites to scan these areas, and that should be a clear indication that something is out of the ordinary with those tiles. So this will be a good test of this new system. I think I'm most excited about this in particular. It is going to be wild to see that. SpaceX also mentioned here that a single tile was removed somewhere on the vehicle, but this is just to study the aerodynamic load differences that a missing tile has on adjacent tiles. Similar to previous missions, the Starship will do a single engine burn to demonstrate again that they will be able to perform a future deorbit burn reliably, and then it will begin its superheated re-entry profile. Given the changes on this vehicle, this mission is designed to stress test those flaps and make sure that the ship can do all the maneuvers required for a future mission to return to the launch site. Starship will end this mission igniting all 3 center sea level engines, flipping to vertical and then landing softly in the Indian Ocean at a precise target. I would love to know how you think this is going to go. Let me know in the comments. Now, alongside the Flight 12 info, we also got a second article highlighting some of the changes around the version 3 pad, the Super Heavy, and the Starship in general. Do check that out in more detail on SpaceX's website because there's a lot here. I've got that linked for you in the description. SpaceX told us here that all 33 engines in fact ignite at the exact same time on Super Heavy for liftoff, unlike the previous versions where they lit up in groups. The ship's aft flaps used to have 2 actuators, but now they only have 1. Instead, they've got 3 motors now to ensure that they still have redundancy should a motor fail. We also have the version 3 PES dispenser mechanisms which have been improved with upgraded actuators and inverters. The goal of this is to increase the deployment speed of each satellite, which will be interesting to compare with previous missions. SpaceX has upgraded the header tank feed lines which run along the inside of the ship from the engines to the nose where the header tanks are. All of these lines are now totally vacuum jacketed, which should almost entirely stop their propellant warming and boiling off. That's critical for being able to keep it in orbit for lengthy timeframes. To help further with cryogenic propellant control, another upgrade is the new high-voltage electrically actuated cryogenic recirculation system. That is a mouthful, and of course it was actually built in partnership with NASA, and it'll help manage propellant interactions with the engines during extended coast phases. Now, speaking of high voltage, version 3 also introduces a set of enhanced avionic units with approximately 60 between both the booster and the ship. All of these have their own integrated batteries and inverters, and if you added their capability together, they all deliver up to 9 megawatts of peak power across the many areas of the vehicles. That is nuts, and each unit has fault detection built in. Now this is interesting too. They've installed a new radio frequency sensor system which will be used to scan inside the tanks to give an accurate reading of how much propellant is still on board. This is an especially important upgrade given that the in-space propellant transfers will be happening in the near future. SpaceX will be watching the shifting propellant levels across multiple vehicles in this exercise, so they need a precise way to determine the updated load and delta-V levels while all that propellant is just floating around in 0G. This really is going to be an amazing mission. They state here that both vehicles have 50 cameras on board looking at everything they practically can. All of it will be downlinked using the Starlink network, and they'll be targeting a maximum bandwidth of 480 megabits per second. Most of these cameras, of course, are likely engineering ones, so we won't get to see the vast majority of that video in the live stream. You never know though, SpaceX may choose to share a little in a later recap video. Now, to finally answer a question many have debated over the last few months in the comments, SpaceX confirmed in this update that they had replaced the hydraulic-powered actuators on the Pad 2 tower arms with new electromechanical-driven actuators. As stated, they did this to improve speed, redundancy and reliability, so that is a nice improvement. I think it's going to be interesting to compare a future Super Heavy catch with these arms compared to what we've seen before. Now, just before moving on, we've got another sweet update on the new drone ship You'll Thank Me Later here in Florida, all thanks to NSF. This new ship, of course, will be the one tasked with transporting Starship vehicles to Florida from Texas, and you can see here it is sporting this black and white canopy over the deck. This will keep the ships and boosters underneath protected from ocean spray. We even got to watch them finalise the installation of the door on the front, and it's a lot like those that we've seen in front of the bays with each level folding up and down. We'll be keeping our eye on the port of Isabel near Starbase in the coming weeks too, because this listing here states its arrival on May 26. We also have plenty of action with SpaceX's Falcon 9 this week too, which all started with a very foggy Vandenberg Space Force base on Monday in the early evening just before sunset. This was the NROL-172 mission carrying a batch of classified National Reconnaissance Office satellites to orbit. Stage separation there, and of course due to the top secret nature of this mission we didn't have any views of the upper stage past this point. What I do like about these secretive missions though is that we tend to get this wonderful ability to make a neat time-lapse from the booster's camera right through that coast phase. During that entry burn we can see the speed dramatically decrease as the booster wipes off a lot of that horizontal velocity, and then as it shuts off we can see that speed climb again as it falls more vertically. This was Booster 1097 flying on its 9th mission, and the drone ship, of course I Still Love You, was out there under that cloud layer as the landing platform. There is that landing burn kicking off just before it passes through that cloud cover, and there we have it, a sweet landing shot there without signal loss. It's also a nice shot on the deck of the drone ship there with water being automatically blasted onto the deck after that fiery landing. A few days later, on Friday in the early evening, we were back with SpaceX's commercial resupply service mission number 34 for NASA. SpaceX hasn't launched one of these since August last year, so it's been a while since we've watched one of these lift off. In this case, it was from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. This is your typical resupply mission to the International Space Station, and this one was sending almost 3 tons of science experiments and supplies on board the Cargo Dragon C209. This, by the way, is the 6th flight for this particular Cargo Dragon, which is a new record for these resupply-only Dragons. Coincidentally, this also matches Crew Dragon Endeavour's total flight count too. As always these days, it was a return to launch site mission. Booster 1096 was also on Flight 6, and there is that gorgeous touchdown at the near-new Landing Zone 40. It's only the 4th recovery at that landing zone, but that's going to climb fast, especially now that only the one drone ship exists for the Florida-based flights. After the 2nd stage arrived in orbit, Dragon soon separated and began its near 50-hour rendezvous with the International Space Station. Now, I've got a bunch of neat short mentions here this week, all of which are interesting. First, this post from Blue Origin working on their Mars telecommunications network solution. They are aiming to have this become a key communication resource. The idea is that they can in future operate their Electra vehicle in low Mars orbit, and by using the reliable UHF technology on board, they'll be able to become a communication relay from vehicles and other assets on the Martian surface. That is not just good news for existing vehicles like the Curiosity and Perseverance rovers, but also for exciting missions coming like Skyfall. With Electra being a relay and doing the heavy lifting, sending those communications all the way back to Earth, the vehicles on the ground aren't going to need to require unrealistically high power or high precision antenna equipment just to communicate with Earth. Along with that, NASA shared Blue Origin's full-scale mock-up of a crew cabin that would form part of their Blue Moon Mark II vehicle. It's nice to see the real scale, and of course, all of the propellant tanks sit above the crew cabin. Now, this is cool too. Here we have the stage separation testing campaign going on for Rocket Lab and their Neutron rocket. Remember, this has a unique Hungry Hippo fairing that opens up and stays attached, and the payload is deployed from within. This test setup here is super unique. What they've done is placed a demonstration upper stage suspended inside the captive fairing structure, just like it would be in flight. Those big hanging weights are being used to simulate the loads and dynamics that the vehicle will experience during that staging and separation event. I think this is a neat insight in how Rocket Lab's unconventional staging architecture is going to evolve. The idea, of course, is that they reuse the entire first stage, including the fairing, and obviously this is going to cut down dramatically on their launch cost. The fairing will open up in about 1.5 seconds, so the sequence should see the fairing open just before main engine cutoff. The second stage will be ejected from within, the fairings would close while the booster returns for its boost back burn, and of course the upper stage ignition would have happened in the meantime. Now check out this intriguing looking animation by Cowboy Space. This has been making the rounds on social media this week, and this rocket here seems to be designed to be larger than Falcon 9 and would have a 20 to 25 metric ton payload capacity to low Earth orbit. The intriguing part here is that they want to use the entire upper stage as a fully deployable and functional 1 megawatt data center once in orbit. Cowboy Space have already successfully raised over $365 million to date, and they currently seem to be valued at around $2 billion. Again, there seems to be this gigantic push to put massive processing equipment into space, largely of course due to huge power and space constraints on Earth. Instead of just sending the payload to space with SpaceX or some other provider though, they are planning to build their own launch vehicle and infrastructure from scratch. I'm pretty skeptical of this idea given the very long, painstaking journey, but in the shorter term, hopefully later this year, they are aiming to launch a small satellite to demonstrate wireless power beaming technology from orbit to the ground using infrared lasers. I've got to say, I've never been particularly sold on that idea either, but I'd love to be proven wrong on how useful such technology would be. As always, best wishes to them with all of this huge work to come. We can always, for sure, use more space action. So there we have another week all wrapped up, and also an exciting week coming. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. Again, a massive thank you to Surfshark VPN for helping us put all the work we can into these videos. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, my friends, I'll catch you next week.